Hollywood, California. A Tuesday evening in October 1958. The dining room of Chasen's restaurant on Beverly Boulevard. The most powerful room in the entertainment industry, where deals worth millions were sealed over prime rib and martinis, where careers were launched and destroyed between the appetizer and the dessert course. Two men are seated at a corner booth. Table 14. The same table they have shared, on and off, for nearly 2 decades. One of them is crying. Not the kind of crying that men of that era permit in public. Not the glistening eye, the manful blink. This is the other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep it bypasses all the social training, all the masculine armor, all the decades of learning how to be a man in front of other men. The other man at the table does not look away. He does not signal the waiter. He does not check who in the room might be watching. He sits completely still, his large hands folded on the white tablecloth, and he simply waits. Because that was the rule. Not a rule that was ever spoken aloud. Not a rule that was written in any contract or agreed upon in any conversation. A rule that existed the way the deepest rules always exist. In the space between two people who have seen each other at their worst and chosen, every single time, to stay. 38 years of Hollywood. 38 years of competition, of award seasons and box office numbers and studio politics, and the 1,000 daily humiliations that the industry inflicts on even its greatest stars. 38 years of wives and children and wars and losses and triumphs, and the particular loneliness that comes from being famous enough that almost no one in the world will ever tell you the truth. And in all of that, not once, not one single time, did either man break the rule. This is that story. To understand what that rule meant, you have to understand what Hollywood looked like in the autumn of 1958, and what it had looked like in the decade before, and the decade before that. The studio system was dying. Not dead, not yet, but dying in the slow, grinding way that empires die, with denial at the top and panic somewhere in the middle and a strange, almost desperate energy among the people who had built their entire lives inside its walls. Television had done what no competitor, no scandal, no war had managed to do. It had given the American public a reason to stay home. Between 1946 and 1958, weekly movie attendance in the United States had fallen from 90 million to roughly 45 million. A collapse of nearly 50% in just 12 years. The men who ran the studios responded the way frightened powerful men always respond, by tightening their grip. Contracts became more controlling. Loan-out agreements became more punishing. The blacklist, which had begun as a political instrument, had metastasized into a general tool of intimidation that the studios wielded against anyone who stepped out of line. To survive in Hollywood in 1958, you needed either extraordinary leverage or extraordinary loyalty. And the two things were not always compatible. Into this landscape, John Wayne and James Maitland Stewart had each carved out something remarkable, genuine independence. Not the performed independence of stars who complained about the system in interviews while quietly doing whatever the studio demanded. Real independence, the kind that came from box office numbers so consistent, so overwhelming, that the studios had no choice but to negotiate. John Wayne, at 51 years old, had appeared in over 150 films. His production company, Batjack Productions, which he had founded in 1952, had given him something almost no actor of his generation possessed. The ability to say no. Not the polite no, the "I'm afraid my schedule won't permit" no. The hard no. The final no. The no that came from a man who understood that the only leverage in Hollywood that could never be taken away was the audience's love. And that his audience, the vast working-class, middle American audience that lined up week after week to see him on screen, was the most loyal audience in the history of the medium. By 1958, Wayne had appeared in 4 of the 10 highest-grossing Western films ever made. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 222 pounds. His hands, and people who shook them never forgot them, were the hands of someone who had spent years working on physical film sets, not the manicured hands of a Hollywood celebrity. He had broken 3 ribs, torn cartilage in his knee, and sustained a shoulder injury. That would have ended most men's physical careers during the production of his films. He had never complained about any of it on set. Not once. Jimmy Stewart was something different and something complementary. At 50 years old, he had survived something that Wayne had not. The Second World War, not as a USO performer or a morale-boosting figurehead, but as a combat pilot. Stewart had flown 20 combat missions over Europe as a bomber pilot with the 445th Bombardment Group. He had watched men die in the air around him. He had come back from the war with something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. A quietness that audiences felt without being able to name. A weight that made even his lightest performances carry something more. Stewart's box office record was, if anything, even more consistent than Wayne's. Between 1950 and 1958, he had appeared in 7 films that each grossed over $3 million, a staggering number in that era. His collaboration with Alfred Hitchcock, Rear Window in 1954, The Man Who Knew Too Much in 1956, Vertigo in 1958, had established him as something beyond a mere movie star. Critics used the word serious about Stewart in a way they rarely used it about actors of his generation. Here were 2 men, then, who had no reason to need each other professionally. Each was, independently, one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood history. Each had his own production arrangements, his own directorial relationships, his own audience. The industry expected them to be rivals. The logic of Hollywood, competitive, zero-sum, built on the assumption that there was only so much glory to go around, demanded it. But here's where it changes. The friendship had begun, as most real things begin, not with a grand gesture but with a small one. It was 1941. A Tuesday afternoon on the back lot of Republic Pictures, Stage 7. Wayne was 33 years old and still building. Still the man who had broken through with Stagecoach 2 years earlier, but hadn't yet become the institution he would become. Stewart was 32 and already an Academy Award winner, his Oscar for The Philadelphia Story sitting on a shelf in his Bel Air home. They had been placed in proximity by a mutual friend, director John Ford, who had a talent for knowing which people needed to be in a room together before those people knew it themselves. Ford had arranged a card game, a weekly poker game that he hosted at his house on Copa de Oro Road in Bel Air, attended by the particular circle of men Ford trusted, which was a small circle and an exclusive one. Wayne arrived first. He always arrived first. It was a habit that people who knew him well recognized as a form of respect. Arriving early meant you had time to understand a room before the room started making demands on you. He was wearing what he always wore off-set: dark trousers, a plain shirt, the clothes of a man who had grown up without money and had never quite trusted the display of it. He was reading the room the way he always read rooms. Not aggressively, not with the theatrical attentiveness of someone performing observation, but with a stillness that was almost animal in its quiet completeness. Stewart walked in 17 minutes later, looked around the room, and registered Wayne in the corner with the particular recognition of someone meeting not a celebrity, but a force of nature. He crossed the room, held out his hand, and said 4 words. "I've been watching you." Wayne shook the hand, and people who witnessed that handshake remembered it. Not because of anything performed about it, but because of the complete absence of performance. No grip testing, no dominance display, no Hollywood smile overlay. Just 2 large hands meeting with the straightforward pressure of men who meant what they communicated physically. "Not much to see," Wayne said. And that was the beginning. But here's what nobody in the room that night understood. What perhaps neither man understood himself yet. They were not becoming friends in the way that Hollywood manufactured friendships, the strategic alliance dressed up in the language of affection. They were becoming something rarer and more durable. They were becoming the kind of friends who could tell each other the truth. In an industry built on surfaces, that was the most dangerous thing imaginable. By 1953, the friendship was 12 years old, and it had been tested in every way that friendships between powerful men in competitive industries get tested. The tests were not dramatic. There was no single confrontation, no moment where one man publicly wronged the other and had to be forgiven. The tests were subtler and more corrosive than that. The accumulated pressure of an industry that found 2 close friends professionally inconvenient and worked, in the way industries work, through insinuation and gossip, and the slow drip of strategic rumor, to create distance between them. The gossip columnists had tried first. Luella Parsons, whose syndicated column reached an estimated 40 million readers in 1953, had run a blind item in February of that year suggesting that 2 of Hollywood's biggest Western stars were cooling on each other after a disagreement over a particular director. The item was fabricated. Both men knew it was fabricated. The director in question, Ford himself, called them both within hours of the column's publication, not to offer reassurance but to suggest, in his typically oblique way, that the best response to a lie was to do nothing. The room went silent, was how the card game went that Thursday when the column was mentioned. Someone at the table, a producer whose name history has mercifully forgotten, made the mistake of raising it directly, of asking, with the bright false casual tone of someone hoping to witness conflict, whether there was any truth to it. Wayne set down his cards. He did not look at the producer. He looked at his hands for approximately 3 seconds, an eternity at a card table. And then he looked up. "Next hand," he said. That was all. But the way he said it, not from anger, not from discomfort, but from a place so far past caring about the question that the question itself seemed to shrink, ended the conversation permanently. Nobody on that set at that table raised it again. Stewart, sitting across from him, had watched the whole thing. He picked up his cards. He said nothing. But after the game, walking to their cars in the dark of Ford's driveway, he stopped and turned to Wayne and said the thing that became, between them, the first articulation of the rule. "I don't talk about you," Stewart said. "Not to the press. Not to the studios. Not to anyone who's going to use it." Wayne looked at him for a long moment. Then, same. One word. One commitment. The beginning of a 40-year discipline that neither man would ever publicly acknowledge and neither man would ever break. But here's where the real test came. Because it's easy to keep a rule when keeping it costs you nothing. The rule between John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart was tested not once, not twice, but in the particular grinding, sustained way that only Hollywood could manage. Through the awards season of 1955, through the political pressures of the late 1950s, through the period between 1960 and 1969, when their careers took divergent paths and the industry watched, with something close to appetite, to see whether the friendship would survive the real demonstration of what the rule meant. The moment that locked it permanently into place and made it not just a private understanding but a philosophy, happened in 3 stages over 18 months between late 1956 and the spring of 1958. In the first stage, Stewart was in trouble. Not professional trouble. His career remained extraordinary. The trouble was personal, internal, the kind that doesn't show up in box office reports or trade paper coverage. Stewart had returned from the war with what we now understand as combat trauma. What his generation called, when they called it anything at all, the war nerves. For most of the late 1940s and early 1950s, he had managed it through work, through the particular therapy of total immersion in a role that left no space for the mind to turn back on itself. But by 1956, the management was becoming harder. The nightmares had returned. The silences that his wife Gloria had learned to navigate were becoming longer and less predictable. He had told Wayne about it in October 1956, at a dinner at Perino's on Wilshire Boulevard. Not in detail. Stewart was not a man who spoke in detail about the interior life, but with enough specificity that Wayne understood what was being said and what was being asked. What was being asked was not advice, not solutions, not the particular masculine response of problem identification followed by problem resolution. What was being asked was simpler and harder than that: presence. The acknowledgement that the other person knew, and that knowing would not flinch. Wayne did not flinch. He sat with Stewart for 4 hours that evening. He asked, at the appropriate moments, the 2 or 3 questions that opened rather than closed the conversation. He did not offer a single piece of advice. He did not, at any point, look uncomfortable. When the conversation was over and Stewart had said what he needed to say, Wayne paid the bill, stood up, and gripped Stewart's shoulder for exactly 4 seconds. Long enough to mean something, brief enough to preserve the dignity of a man who was not asking for pity. In the second stage, it was Wayne's turn. January 1957. Wayne had received, through channels that moved quickly in Hollywood, information that a major trade publication was preparing a profile that would cast serious doubt on certain decisions he had made during the production of The Conqueror in 1956. A film shot in Utah's Snow Canyon, downwind from nuclear weapons testing sites that the federal government had used between 1951 and 1953. The profile would suggest, with the careful insinuation of journalism that cannot yet prove what it suspects, that Wayne's insistence on location shooting in that area had exposed the cast and crew to radiation levels that were not safe. Wayne knew some version of this was true. He had made the decision. He had weighed what the studios told him about the safety of the location against what he could see with his own eyes, which was a desert landscape that looked, to a man who had spent decades in the American Southwest, like a place where something had happened to the air. He had made the call. He had brought a cast of 220 people to that desert for 96 days. He was sitting with this knowledge, the specific weight of a decision you cannot undo, when Stewart called him. Not because Stewart had heard about the trade peace. He hadn't. He called because it was a Thursday, and calling on Thursdays had become, without either man ever proposing it, a habit. 15 minutes into the conversation, Wayne told him what was happening. Stewart listened without interrupting for 11 minutes. Then he said, "What do you need?" Not what happened. Not whose fault was it. Not the careful, distancing language of someone positioning themselves away from a situation that might become damaging. Just, what do you need? That's not friendship as Hollywood understood it. That's something older and more difficult. In the third stage, and this is the stage that crystallized everything, the rule was publicly tested in a way that neither man had anticipated. The year was 1958. The occasion was the publication of a feature in a major entertainment magazine, one of the 3 or 4 publications that shaped industry opinion in that era, that positioned Wayne and Stewart as opposing figures in a debate about the direction of American cinema. The piece, which ran to 4,000 words and was accompanied by photographs of both men on separate film sets, argued that Wayne represented a kind of reactionary Hollywood traditionalism, while Stewart represented a more psychologically sophisticated approach to screen acting. The author of the piece, a critic with genuine credentials and genuine hostility to Wayne's politics, had interviewed both men separately. He had, in his interview with Stewart, made pointed references to Wayne's public political positions and asked Stewart directly whether he agreed with them. Stewart's response, as it appeared in print, was 6 words. "Duke and I don't discuss that." 6 words. No elaboration, no qualification, no performed neutrality, no diplomatic non-answer that was really an answer. Just a clean, complete refusal to make public property of a private relationship. In the second of reading those 6 words, Wayne's personal assistant, who read the trade papers each morning before Wayne was awake, set the magazine down on Wayne's kitchen table and waited. In the 3rd second, according to the assistant who recounted this story 30 years later, Wayne walked in, poured coffee, picked up the magazine, read the piece, reached Stewart's quote, and set the magazine down. He did not speak for approximately 45 seconds. His assistant later said it was the quietest 45 seconds she had ever spent in a room with another person. Then Wayne picked up the telephone. He dialed Stewart's home number, a number he had memorized in 1943 and had never needed to look up since. When Stewart answered, Wayne said, "Read it yet?" "Yes," Stewart said. "Good," Wayne said. And he hung up. 14 witnesses were present at various points in and around that kitchen that morning. None of them heard what was said on Stewart's end. But the assistant who heard Wayne's 3 words described the way he said good. Not with relief, not with gratitude, not with the emotional weight of a man who has just been publicly defended. With the simple, settled acknowledgement of a man who had always known what the answer would be and was not surprised to be proven right. That's not relief. That's certainty. The dinner at Chasen's that October evening, the one where Stewart was crying, where Wayne sat with his hands folded on the white tablecloth and simply waited, was 3 weeks after the magazine piece had been published. It was about something else entirely. Stewart's father, Alexander Stewart, had died in December 1961. But the grief that surfaced at Chasen's that October evening in 1958 was not straightforward mourning. It was the anticipatory grief of a man who had just learned that his father's health was declining, that the decline was not reversible, and that the particular relationship between a son and a father that had defined, in ways Stewart was only beginning to understand, everything he valued about himself. That relationship was moving, irrevocably, toward its end. Stewart talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Wayne listened for an hour and 40 minutes. At some point, Stewart would later say he couldn't remember exactly when, Wayne said the thing that became, for Stewart, the philosophical center of everything the friendship had taught him. "The only thing that lasts," Wayne said, "is what you do when it costs you something." He wasn't talking about the magazine piece. He wasn't talking about politics or box office or any of the 1,000 professional calculations that consumed most of their industry's waking hours. He was talking about the one thing that neither man had ever been willing to compromise. The decision, made again every single day, to be the kind of person who could be trusted with another person's reality. The rule between them, the rule they had never spoken aloud, that had never needed to be spoken aloud, was the operational expression of that philosophy. Don't use me publicly. Don't make capital out of my name. Don't perform our friendship for an audience. Show up when it costs something to show up, and say nothing when saying something would cost the other person." Stewart looked at him across the table for a long moment. Then he said, "How did you know that?" Wayne considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "My father," he said finally. "Clyde Morrison, druggist in Glendale. Never in his life did anything for an audience." He raised his glass. Stewart raised his. They did not toast. They simply held the glasses raised for a moment, the physical gesture of two men acknowledging something that neither of them could have articulated fully, and neither of them needed to. The waiter who came to refill their water glasses 5 minutes later would say, decades later, that he had seen every kind of dinner at Chasen's over 23 years of working there. He had seen deals and seductions and firings and reconciliations, and every variety of human negotiation that power and money could produce. "Those two," he said, "were the only people I ever saw in that room who weren't performing anything. They were just there." Years later, in 1983, 2 years after Wayne's death, for years before Stewart would receive the American Film Institute Life Achievement Award, Stewart was asked in an interview with a journalist from the Los Angeles Times to describe his friendship with John Wayne. He was quiet for a long time. The journalist, who had been interviewing celebrities for 20 years and was accustomed to the practiced pause that preceded the prepared answer, later said that this silence was different. It was not preparation. It was actual thought. "He never once," Stewart said finally, "said anything about me to anyone that he wouldn't have said to my face. In 40 years. The journalist waited for more. There was no more. That was the complete answer. When the article was published, the quote ran in the third paragraph, beneath a photograph of both men from the set of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the 1962 John Ford film that had put them on screen together for the one and only time. 2 hours and 3 minutes of cinema that critics still argue contains some of the finest American screen acting ever committed to film. In that film, Stewart's character and Wayne's character exist in fundamental opposition. The educated lawyer versus the frontier gunfighter, the future versus the past, the man of words versus the man of action. Ford had cast them deliberately, knowing that the tension between their screen personas would carry a weight that no amount of scripting could manufacture. What Ford also knew, and what the audiences who watched the film felt without being able to articulate, was that the two men trusted each other completely. That beneath the narrative opposition, beneath the performed conflict, there was a bedrock of genuine regard that made every scene between them land with a particular weight. You cannot manufacture that on a film set. You cannot direct it into existence. It either exists between two people, or it does not. It existed because of the rule. Because for 21 years before that film was made, neither man had once given the other a reason to doubt. In 1991, 9 years after the interview, Stewart gave a speech at a memorial for John Ford in which he talked about what Wayne had taught him about the nature of loyalty. He did not use the word loyalty. He used a different word, steadiness. The steadiness, he said, of a man who decided once what mattered and never had to decide again. The students in Stewart's acting class, he had been teaching an informal seminar at USC for 3 years by then, wrote that word down. Some of them kept it. Some of them passed it on to their own students. One decision. One rule. One friendship that the industry tried to complicate and could not. Now return, for a moment, to Table 14 at Chasen's restaurant. October 1958. A man with his hands folded on a white tablecloth, waiting with complete patience while his friend found his way back from somewhere difficult. Nobody in that room knew what they were witnessing. Nobody in the room would have known how to describe it. An industry that had spent 40 years teaching its people that everything was a transaction, that every relationship was a resource to be managed and a risk to be minimized, had produced two men who had simply, quietly, without announcement, without any expectation of credit, decided not to believe it. He didn't calculate it. He didn't perform it. He just did it. One rule. 40 years. Never broken. There was another moment. A conversation that happened not at Chasen's or at Ford's house or on any film set, but in a parking lot outside a studio gate in Burbank on a Wednesday afternoon in 1966, witnessed by exactly one person who has never spoken publicly about what was said. That conversation, and what it cost both men to have it, is a story for another time. But what happened in that parking lot, that may be the truest thing either of them ever did.